evening and welcome to The Proof is Out There. When it comes to UFO sightings, the classic saucer shape from the 1950s and 60s has long become passé, and instead it's often bright orbs and cylindrical objects which are reported more and more frequently. Recently, however, we've been adding another shape to that list: triangles. But why? And what does it mean? Well, maybe this next video can shed some light.
November 2021. A passenger on a train speeding through the Italian countryside notices something strange outside his window and starts recording. 3 orange lights in a triangular formation floating in the air above the horizon. Let's zoom in. The lights not only appear to be orbs, but they're also glowing. The video is uploaded to social media and quickly becomes a sensation.
A lot of the comments on the video obviously linked this light pattern to the typical triangular UFO, making claims that this was some sort of alien spacecraft.
Journalist MJ Benaya says that kind of reaction shouldn't be surprising.
Italy has a fairly rich UFO history. In the early 1950s, an entire soccer game was actually stopped in the city of Florence when a crowd of 10,000 people in the stadium looked up and saw a handful of strange oval-shaped UFOs fly over them.
Even before then, a UFO crash in 1933 allegedly became the catalyst for a secret program led by one of Italy's most notorious figures.
Some people believe that Mussolini, the famed Italian dictator, had a secret UFO hunting program. The idea was that in 1933, a UFO crashed in Italy, and Mussolini allegedly hired famed radio pioneer Guglielmo Marconi to figure out what this technology was and whether it could be weaponized.
The Italian Center for UFO Studies documented almost 10,000 cases over a 50-year period. And we've reported on some of them, including this anomalous event we investigated last year. Could this triangle be something related? We asked for our expert's opinion.
We begin with forensic video analyst Michael Primo. Our first question: has the footage been manipulated in any way?
The lights appear to be real, at least to my naked eye when analyzing it frame by frame. But what the encoder is saying using macro block analysis is that this information in this green color is different than this information in this green color. So it's a possibility that some use of CGI was added to this recording based on the macro block analysis, but no definitive conclusions can be drawn at this time.
Acknowledging that red flag, we take the video to astronomer and video effects designer Mark D'Antonio to see if this could be a plane.
I don't think that this one here is an aircraft, because an airplane light of this brightness would be the landing lights, and airplanes generally have 2 landing lights, if not just 1 in some cases, not 3. Now, you could say, well, is this a stack of aircraft, one farther from the other, making a logical triangle from this perspective? But these lights look all the same brightness, and if you stack up planes like that, the furthest plane away is going to be several miles behind the first plane in the lines, will look a little bit dimmer and smaller than the one in the front.
D'Antonio rules out any commercial or military aircraft, but he does believe there is a clue to the mystery in the video.
If you also look carefully, when this train is moving, it passes a sign along the way. The sign is being held up by 2 legs, and this object passes in front of one of those legs.
The lights don't disappear when the train passes the sign outside. D'Antonio thinks it's because this mysterious object isn't actually in front of the photographer.
I think that this is a light fixture reflected in the window from one of the adjacent train seats.
But when we ask science writer Mick West to study the video, he disagrees.
I don't think this is a reflection. For one thing, it's the only light being reflected that you can see. If it was a train with lots of people, you would expect to see more. And when the person filming it is moving the camera, you see these bits of dirt on the window move around. But when they're moving around, there's no movement at all with this object, which means that it's not a reflection.
By zooming in, Mick sees the lights are not staying in one place.
I took the video and I tried stabilizing the lights on the screen so they all stay in exactly the same position. And you can see that it's not like a single solid object. They seem to be moving somewhat independently. Another thing that you notice is that the distance between the lights and the tree line gradually decreases.
So we have orange objects that appear to be slowly drifting down. West believes there's an orange light that fits the bill. Military flares.
They're attached to little parachutes, so they just basically sink down fairly slowly, and they burn for about a minute or two, and then they'll usually drop.
Our verdict? This is a toss-up. We can't explain why the lights don't pass behind the sign, but we can't call it a reflection either. We can't even say for sure it's real. The military flare theory feels right, but our experts aren't unanimous. Until we know more, we have to say this remains unidentified.
It's May 2019 near Minsk, Belarus. A man named Andrei Turkhanovets posts a bizarre video. Watch. Let's rewind that back. What is that bright blue sphere? And how can it travel across the railroad tracks, throwing off sparks as it moves? The internet's reaction blew Andrei's mind.
It has almost 2 million viewers at this moment.
Some commenters guess that Andrei has recorded a rare phenomenon known as ball lightning. Strange luminescent balls in the air that eyewitnesses have been reporting since the 1600s. Some 19th century accounts claim they smelled of sulfur and considered them the work of the devil. More recently, there was this sighting near a field in Novosibirsk, Russia. This image resembles a phenomenon reported back in World War II. Odd zigzagging balls of light in the sky. Allied fighter pilots dubbed them Foo Fighters.
And it was really kind of universally believed amongst the Allies that this was likely some type of advanced Nazi technology. But interestingly enough, when you look at the Luftwaffe, so the German Air Force, they were seeing them too.
To this day, some scientists argue that ball lightning doesn't exist based on how rarely it's seen. So is that what we're seeing here? To kick off our analysis, we went back to our forensic video analyst, Michael Primo.
Primo begins by breaking down Andrei's video, focusing not on the images, but the sounds.
I noted that the sounds were up front and didn't sound natural with being in the outdoors. Sounds like something that was added.
He concludes that the Belarus video has been edited. Yet he says the other example from Russia has not been. So could it be an example of the famous Foo Fighters? McMillan says the ball of light looks similar, but behaves differently.
What's been called a Foo Fighter lasted for a great deal of time and engaged in a lot of maneuvers and stuff that you just don't see there.
So could it instead be a natural weather phenomenon? Atmospheric scientist Dr. Deanna Hens traced the weather conditions in Russia at the time of the sighting.
If you're going to get ball lightning, lightning also has to be generally a likelihood, and I'm not seeing a lot of evidence of either. It does kind of reduce the likelihood that that is a possibility.
However, Hens concedes that so little is known about ball lightning that it's hard to rule out.
It is a very poorly understood phenomenon, and because it's difficult to capture, it's also very, very difficult to study.
So the Russian video might be a genuine example. But when we talk to Andrei toward the end of our investigation, he admits he created the dazzling effect in his video with CGI.
I processed the video on my computer with specialized software.
Though he never thought it would go viral.
So our verdict? The Belarus video is clearly doctored. Please, that sound design was a dead giveaway. As far as the other footage, we're gonna say it might be genuine ball lightning. But what causes ball lightning remains a mystery. A good reminder to remain as humble as we are curious in the face of the unknown.
This is the Barents Sea, located between Russia and the North Pole. It's one of the most remote and unexplored places on Earth. And one deep-sea fisherman there has brought creatures to the surface that are so bizarre, his Instagram account has made headlines. Fish with bulging lips, what looks like human dentures, and fluorescent red-colored eyes. Creatures with heads shaped like aliens. The images are so bizarre, and there are so many of them. Journalist MJ Banayas, who covers the unexplained, says it's made people wonder if there's something unnatural going on below.
These creatures look so bizarre that people naturally question something's wrong. One theory is that these aren't natural animals, but rather the product of some sort of bizarre mutation.
Look again for yourself. Mutation seems like a reasonable explanation for this. And it turns out the idea of mutated Russian fish may not be far-fetched, as our military expert Tim McMillan explains.
Any government that has any kind of nuclear proliferation program has always had this problem of how do you get rid of your waste. And for a number of years, the Soviet Union's answer was dumping it into the Barents Sea. 17,000 nuclear containers, multiple different nuclear-powered ships were sunk, and an entire nuclear submarine. From a period of about the 1950s until the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Whoa. So the Soviets used the Barents Sea as a nuclear toilet bowl for decades. And as our physicist, Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi explains, radiation and DNA don't mix.
Radiation is really tiny subatomic particles that are flying along. And when they encounter a DNA molecule, they can strike it and break it and change it. So when DNA is subject to radiation, then what happens is the instructions for writing a new animal are changed. So you could end up with anything virtually.
A recent scientific study found that a Soviet nuclear submarine at the bottom of the Barents Sea was nearly 1 million times more radioactive than previously estimated. So are these freaky fish the result of all that dumping? Our marine biologist, Dr. Shay Conger, looks for answers.
Conger looks first at the fish's shape and scales.
If these fish were impacted by radiation, we would expect to see strange bumps or protrusions on different parts of the body. But I don't see any signs of radiation sickness or poisoning throughout this animal. Its epidermal tissue actually seems to be pretty intact.
Okay, so Conger says these fish aren't the victims of a nuclear waste dump. But then what else could explain some of these bizarre features? Conger has a theory.
They undergo a process of what we call barometric trauma.
It turns out that some of these fish have the bends. When human divers come up too quickly from the deep, the change in pressure causes the gases in their body to expand. Well, same for fish.
Often these fish will come to the surface with their stomach sticking out of their mouth because of the extreme pressure of having the gases within their body tissues expand at such a quick rate.
But there's got to be more to this fish story, right? Conger says the real story was millions of years in the making.
Each species on Earth has a very predictable and well-defined evolutionary pathway that makes it what it is today. These animals aren't alien, they're just adapted to an extremely different environment than we're used to.
The jury is still out about the long-term effects this contamination will have on marine species. Dr. Conger cautions that the impact could take decades to be fully felt. For us, natural evolution and the bends explain these weird-looking fish. So our verdict? This is a non-nuclear phenomenon.
October 2019, near the Vrbas River in Bosnia. Archaeology professor Ivana Panzic is studying the ruins of a medieval fortress. But the discovery of a relic under the choppy rapids shocks Panzic and her team. It's a sword lodged straight into a stone in the riverbed about 36 feet below the surface. Despite being down there for probably hundreds of years, the sword is remarkably well preserved.
We did several dives to decide what we're going to use during the excavation. The whole process of excavating the sword took us 2 days.
The team manages to free the blade, but how this sword got in this stone in the first place is a mystery. Could it be the very Excalibur from the King Arthur legend? No concrete evidence exists that a real King Arthur actually ruled parts of England, beyond what was written about him centuries later. Some historians think he could be based on a real 5th century Romano-British leader named Ramathias, who fought invading Goths. Details are scarce, but even if Arthur is entirely fictional, could the story of Excalibur have inspired medieval copycats?
It's possible that if this legend of King Arthur did make its way into Bosnia-Herzegovina, that individuals were attempting to recreate this story, to encase a sword in stone so that the rightful heir of this kingdom could pull the sword out in the same way that King Arthur did.
Or maybe it's the other way around. Could this real sword in the stone be the inspiration for the King Arthur legend?
So the big question is, could a sword really penetrate a rock? Look, that's a tough one. Most rocks are much harder than any pointed steel blade. So how can we explain this strange find? It's time to convene our own Knights of the Round Table.
Maritime archaeologist Peter Campbell says based on the testing done by the museum in Bosnia, the dates don't line up for it to have belonged to King Arthur or to have inspired his legend.
This sword dates to the 13th to 15th century AD. The legendary King Arthur predates this sword by nearly 1,000 years. So we can definitely discard the notion that this sword is in any way Excalibur.
And what about the notion that the noblemen of the nearby fortress could have an Arthur copycat? Yes, it would be strange to do such a thing in a river, and Campbell agrees.
One hypothesis that's been raised is the sword was put in the stone deliberately as part of some sort of king-making ceremony. We can effectively discard this notion because the sword was found at 36 feet, which is far deeper than they would have been able to dive in the 13th to 15th century AD.
Still, he believes, based on what he sees, the sword belonged to someone important.
We can see that it is finely crafted. It was very expensive metal used in its manufacture. And all of that indicates that this was probably the sword of a noble person.
And that leads him to think there is some ritualistic reason it's in the water.
There's actually a very well-developed tradition, especially in Europe, of discarding of swords and armor in rivers, lakes, and bogs. And this dates from the Bronze Age all the way up through the medieval period. If somebody wins a major battle, they can discard the sword into the river as some sort of ritual offering.
And as to how it ended up lodged in the stone.
Frequently, we see heavy objects deposited in rivers that work their way down with the current into sediment or into rocks. And then it has many centuries of wiggling and burrowing down into the cracks. The metal is also corroding, attaching it to the rocks, and sediment is filling in, and it's becoming rock itself. This explains why the sword appeared to be stuck in the rock. In fact, these are normal site formation processes, as we call them, for river environments.
So, our verdict? This is a geological phenomenon. The sword didn't penetrate the stone built up around the sword. However, the sword's true origin and owner still remain a mystery. Perhaps it was wielded by another legendary king.